we're now going on to the final part of the presentation, which is the work which we've been doing here at Parsons on Geraldine Stutz and her time at Henri Bendel's, and is the research that initiated this event this afternoon. Do we have a slide? Okay, so basically this is going to be kind of a three-parter. Lauren and I are going to introduce the research, and this is Lauren Sagadore, who's been working on as the Stutz Research Fellow on the last 2 years of the research. We're going to introduce the research and some of our findings, and then I'm going to have a conversation. We've actually got some of our primary sources here, which is really fortunate for us. So I'm going to have a conversation with two people who worked with Geraldine Stutz and knew her very well, and have been wonderful resources for our project. And then we're going to tell you a little bit about the outcomes of our project. This is not actually going to take as long as it sounds. And then we'll take some questions, and then we'll allow you to have drinks and snacks. So, there's not long to go. You've been a great audience. So, to begin, I want to just tell you a little bit about the origins of this project and how it started. I actually found out about the Geraldine Stutz Trust, who've been very generous in funding this research, because they were funding, they had been funding students at Parsons. When I found out about this, I got more intrigued about why we hadn't been also looking into the work of Geraldine Stutz, because nothing had been documented on her work at Bendel's. And as a result of this, Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. As a result of this, I put a proposal, quite a modest proposal, to the Trust, which enabled us to conduct a 3-year project. We are now in the 3rd year. And also enabled me to give the opportunities to some of our graduate students in our school to work as researchers. So Lauren is the 3rd of the Trust Fellows, but we also had 2 more fellows. Maureen Brewster, who's with us today. Maureen, would you like to stand, wave, bow? And also, Maureen's a graduate of our MA in Fashion Studies, as is Lauren, and also Junya Peng, who couldn't be with us today, but she's a graduate of our Masters in the History of Decorative Arts and Design, as it was called now, the History of Design and Curatorial Studies. So together, Maureen and June worked on the first part of the first part of the project, with a view to looking at Stutz, but also looking at women in New York fashion, retail, and business. And I set Maureen and June the task of looking at the department store as a background to looking at Stutz. Of course, Bendel's wasn't a department store, it was a specialty retailer, but nevertheless, this was my strategy. It proved slightly ill-advised because, of course, well, as some of you know, and we've heard this afternoon, this is not the easiest of tasks necessarily, finding out about the department stores. Also, there's a lot to find. So Maureen and June did a very good job, but in the 2nd and 3rd years, when Lauren took over, we decided to start with Stutz, which was a very good idea. So just to outline, so our project was trying to look at the fact, as we've said, that women are underrepresented in many disciplines in history, including fashion, and also to consider the challenges faced by scholars in researching their stories. And of course, we've heard a lot about that this afternoon. A little bit about Geraldine Stutz, who some of you I know have never heard of. She was a respected businesswoman in New York City from the 1950s, and particularly during the 29 years from 1957 to 1986 that she spent at the head of Henri Bendel. She was widely acknowledged by her contemporaries as one of the city's most important tastemakers and fashion influencers. And yet, there's been little academic scholarship accounting for her leadership in New York fashion retailing, nor even many popular accounts of her story. In fact, a glance at Wikipedia, for example, turns up only 7 short lines of pretty scant information. So as in the case of many of the women who've been discussed today, their stories are still largely unknown, and it's precisely this unknown nature that makes them quite challenging to research. So our methodology, therefore, was multidisciplinary. And the first challenge was that there is even little secondary literature written that was of use to us, in part because also of a lack of primary material, department store records not having been kept or not having been accessible, as we've already heard this afternoon. Many accounts of New York fashion have understandably largely focused on design and on the garment district. And there was also very little available on the second half of the 20th century, our period of study, which made it quite challenging for us also to establish the context in which Stutz was working. Of course, like many of you in the room, I didn't even have the advantage of being here then. I was somewhere else. So that took unpacking too. So as a result, we had to put together primary sources also, and they were really of three main types. The first component of this was periodicals, and again, we've heard a lot about the significance of periodicals to this sort of research this afternoon. Particularly the New York Times, Women's Wear Daily, Life magazine, Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and numerous other publications for references to Stutz and to Bendel's. These media were able to provide valuable descriptions of the store, the climate of retail at the time, and also quotes from Geraldine Stutz, who at first to us was, even as a person, quite elusive. The second primary source was archives, making use of collections at the New York Public Library, the Museum of the City of New York, and significantly at FIT. Some good chunks of information were found in those collections, and particularly videos and recorded interviews at FIT. And the third primary source, and what proved the most significant research method, and certainly the most enjoyable, was oral history. Because of the time of our subject and our case study, we were able to speak in person, via phone or email, with over a dozen former Bendel's employees, designers, and associates, including friends and family of Geraldine Stutz. And again, I welcome those of you here this afternoon. It's a delight to have you here. These interviews were invaluable and very rich, setting down for us new paths, but filling many gaps that the written accounts had neglected and that we just hadn't really come to understand, and even the really famous Street of Shops, which we'll talk about in a moment. Moreover, many of the images and materials on the research website, which we'll be sharing later today, were provided by these contributors. Some of those who generously gave their time and memories in, I think, probably sharing that for the first time. So again, very grateful for that. So in short, this project highlighted a multi-methodological approach to research, which through much digging and perseverance has revealed a rich picture about both Henri Bendel and Geraldine Stutz. So now a little bit about what we found out. Let's begin with Henri Bendel himself. Henri Bendel was indeed a man from Louisiana who established a millinery shop on 9th Street in the West Village in 1896. Soon after, Bendel also began designing clothes, and like most specialty shops at the time, the store offered Paris copies and its own derivatives, and its couture department was known as one of the best in the city. As a carriage trade store, Bendel's attracted the city's wealthy and elite. Keeping pace with the migrations of other department and specialty stores in the city, Bendel's relocated just north of Herald Square on Fifth Avenue in 1907. Not long after, however, the store moved again and once more and settled further uptown in a brownstone on 10 West 57th Street. That was in 1912, and that was the location of the store during our research. This was largely a residential street, adjacent, of course, to the mansions and luxury hotels of Upper Fifth Avenue. But 57th Street soon became home to many other carriage trade stores, such as Milgram, Stein & Blaine, Brooke Weiss, Dobbs, and J. Thorpe, making 57th a shopping destination in the city. And of course, right close by were Bonwit Teller, Bergdorf Goodman, and around the corner on Fifth Avenue was the luxury shopping hub, which still to some extent remains today. Henri Bendel continued to be a family-operated business until the mid-1950s, when it was finally sold to a group of investors. Within 2 years, the store was sold a second time, and in 1957, the store was taken over by the Genesco Shoe Corporation, a large conglomerate in footwear wholesale, which had also published Bonwit Teller in 1956. Within 6 months of the Genesco purchase, President Maxi Jarman made the bold move of naming Geraldine Stutz president of the store to lead the transition. Now this, as you're probably not surprised, having heard the other presentations this afternoon, was still something of a surprise to retailers in New York. And particularly because of the climate of the 1950s. Though the fashion industry was considered a pink-collar space where women had greater opportunities for professional advancement, nevertheless, there were few women in senior executive positions in New York fashion establishments. When she took over presidency of Bendel's, the then 33-year-old Geraldine Stutz was only the third female ever to preside over a major New York fashion establishment, following Hortense Odlum at Bonwit Teller and Dorothy Shaver at Lord & Taylor, as we now know. Stutz's own training was also relatively unconventional for a retailer, and this goes back to something Caroline was saying in the first presentation of the routes that women took to jobs, which was in the business, but in different aspects of the business. Most retailers at the time were groomed through executive training programs within stores, but in contrast, Geraldine Stutz began her career in fashion journalism as an editor at Glamour magazine. She transitioned to retail only in 1954, when she came to another Genesco business, I. Miller Shoes, and rose quickly through the ranks to become vice president and general manager of their retail stores, and was also the person who brought Andy Warhol to Miller's, and where he produced those wonderful shoe illustrations that I'm sure we all know. Though Stutz had an impressive track record in her short time at I. Miller, she was without formal training as a merchant, as was expected of a merchant executive in the field. In an interview in 1977 with Dorothy Hannenberg, which Lauren will mention more in a minute, which is housed in the archive at FIT, Stutz commented that there were enormous amounts of resistance to my A, being a woman, B, being very young, C, to my never having had any retailing experience at all, I think probably in that order. She also suggested she had not been the first choice for the job, but that Maxi Jarman couldn't find anyone else to take over Bendel's slumping business. But after a few months of hesitations, Stutz agreed to take over the reins and set about creating a new vision for Henri Bendel. And I'm now going to hand over to Lauren to talk about that vision and how it played out.
Hello, everyone. And I'm really excited to be speaking today on this research, which I was fortunate enough to get to do over the last couple of years through the fellowship. And so Geraldine Stutz's approach to making over Henri Bendel when she took over in 1957 was enacted through modernizing the store, and similarly to what we heard from female presidents from Hortense Odlum at Bonwit Teller. First thing she did, installing air conditioning, but the more major physical renovation that she undertook was on the first floor of the store. So confronting with a very challenging space to merchandise, Stutz transformed the narrow yet cavernous first floor of Bendel's into a series of small shops with a main street running down the middle and connecting alleyways snaking between the boutiques. The design of the shops is credited to Howard McKim Glazebrook, an architect and display artist, known to Stutz from her time at I. Miller, who subsequently managed a number of renovations at Bendel's. In an interview with Rosalind Lax in 1985 for the publication Women Making History, Stutz described the street as, quote, a bizarre image dating back to the souks of Mesopotamia. The Street of Shops, as it was called, first opened to the public in September of 1959, and it would become Stutz's most famous merchandising innovation and a very important design trend in American fashion retail in the second half of the 20th century. At its core, the Street of Shops really created intimate experiences within the larger store, sometimes through small leased boutiques or boutiques that the store itself operated. So here, customers could comfortably browse through cosmetics, stationery, handbags, etc., before moving upstairs to the various clothing department. It really created great spaces for merchandising those smaller products and accessories. So while decor for each part of the street was very distinctive in each individual boutique, it was, as a whole, undeniably luxurious and glamorous. It was paved in marble with a Trevi fountain, apparently welcoming shoppers at the entrance. So in 1960, a great Cosmopolitan magazine excerpt described the attention to detail and the richness of the carefully selected decor, which I'll read. So, quote, "The street, completed last September, contains 8 shops in all, each with its own display windows and individual decor. The bijoutier, or jewelry maker's shop, has a multi-arched roof supported by tapering columns of malachite. Display cases are suspended between the columns and all the stones shown in them are real. The stocking shop is a masterpiece of treillage, and the perfumer boasts an authentic Louis XVI door from the Loire Valley Chateau in its beige facade. The Baroque facade of the Bagatelle, housing scarves, stools, and handkerchiefs, is in light tones of aubergine, while the gift shop, in shades of gray and French blue, is done in a circular Louis XVI style. The street ends with the Milliner, a 2-story shop of Palladian influence, carpeted and furnished in shades of beige and white. The total effect is reminiscent of such old-world luxury shopping thoroughfares as the Faubourg Saint-Honoré in Paris and Milan's Galliera Duomo." So really, those descriptions of the street of shops, which are very few and far between, really show the theatricality and the attention to detail, which really characterized the display within the store throughout Geraldine Stutz's presidency. And initially, actually, when Stutz unveils the street of shops, this is kind of her big coming out within the retail community. At that point, she'd been relatively quiet about the other renovations that had been taking place on other floors. She was very excited about it, but when the other store presidents, merchants came to town, they said, "You've got guts, get Jerry," but they turned around and called it the street of flops and Jerry's folly. Despite this, though, the success of the street was very apparent, was embraced by the media very quickly and overwhelmingly popular amongst customers. And though it did evolve over time, and some of the main shops we can see even at the beginning, Sentiments, the Leg Shop, the Gilded Cage for cosmetics, Shoe Biz, and many others, there were a dozen by the 60s and 70s. The street of shops remained a fixture of Henri Bendel throughout Geraldine Stutz's career and had a significant impact on merchandising design, as I mentioned. So Stutz's other great success was the store's fashion merchandising strategy. And Stephanie commented today that, it's really even more untold than the story of some of these presidents is also the story of some of the buyers. And we were very fortunate to get to speak to a number of Bendel's buyers, Joan Kaner, Jean Rosenberg, Marion Greenberg, who we'll hear a little bit today. And though Stutz was involved with some of the decisions around designers that the store carrying, Bendel's depth of design talent was thanks to a team of skilled buyers led by Vice President of Merchandising, Jean Rosenberg. And Jean was at the store from 1958, before Geraldine became president, and was there all throughout Geraldine's presidency and left shortly after Geraldine left the store in 1986. So Bendel's core premise, similarly to many other shops, was regarding that his fashion merchandise should be exclusive. But this was pretty difficult for the store, considering it was of a smaller size in comparison to competitors like Bonwit Teller or Bergdorf Goodman. And so many larger brands, like Bill Blass, for example, would not be exclusive at Bendel's. So the store adopted 3 main strategies to overcome this predicament. And the first was working directly with 7th Avenue manufacturers to have unique changes made to garments. So Bendel's buyers would work directly with designers and manufacturers to have just small little adjustments made to a clothing piece. Maybe it's the sleeve on a blouse or a detail about the shape of a coat. And then these new, subtly unique garments were then carried at Bendel's on an exclusive basis while also being available outside of New York. So that was the first piece. The second, and arguably more significant strategy, was Stutz's mission to Jean Rosenberg. So Rosenberg, whom Stutz referred to as Bendel's fashion conscience, was first sent to Europe in 1959, tasked with searching out new fashions, anything that she found exciting. And the intent was to bypass traditional couture, which was really the staple of the American fashion industry from a design perspective in many ways. And Rosenberg was to seek out smaller designers who would show exclusively at Bendel's. And so in Rosenberg and her team's subsequent missions scouring Italy, Paris, London over the 1960s and 1970s, she brought back to Bendel's many emerging European ready-to-wear designers, including Sonia Rykiel, Chloe, Krizia, Jean Muir, Jean-Charles de Castelbajac, Emmanuel Kahn, and Zandra Rhodes, to name just a few, introducing them for the first time to both the New York and American market. In the 1980s, later on, Rosenberg would also be an early buyer in the Japanese market, bringing Rei Kawakubo of Comme des Garçons to New York. And throughout this time, Stutz would set up individual boutiques within the store to showcase these favorite designers, for example, Sonia Rykiel, Jean Muir, etc. And this was also another major innovation on the physical merchandising side to highlight these coveted designs. In addition to, however, seeking out these really exciting European designs, Bendel's also focused on discovering new American design talent, specifically in New York. And Stutz was frequently quoted saying, "If you can't afford to hire the best, you hire the young who will become the best." And so as Bendel's reputation for fashion leadership developed over the 1960s and 70s, many emerging New York designers were referred to Stutz to show off their collection. And one of the most famous cases of this was with Stephen Burrows, who was an African-American designer who came to prominence in New York in the early 1970s. In a talk in 1993, which he gave at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on his career, he talked a lot about his start at Bendel's. And he says, quote, "I took a couple of things I had just finished for myself, actually, a wrap coat and a couple of matte jersey tops. I think I took her a pair of pants. She looked at everything and she grabbed the coat. I had literally just finished this coat, and she put it on and walked to the mirror. And she had one of those mirrors where you could see everything, and she twirled around, and she turned and said, 'I'll give you a boutique on the 3rd floor. You'll come to work at Bendel's. You'll start Monday.' And I said, 'Monday at Bendel's?' I went nuts, because in FIT when I was going to school, Bendel's was like the dream store. To have our clothes in Bendel's, it was the dream." So in a similar fashion, Bendel's attracted other designers, including Mary McFadden and handbag designer Carlos Falchi. And the store was very committed to promoting and supporting this new talent, effectively launching many design careers. So in this great picture, you can see a number of designers which were at Bendel's in this time in the 70s, including Carlos Falchi, Holly Harp, Ralph Lauren, Geraldine Stutz is in the middle there. And so the store gave these designers tools to grow, whether it was in the form of advice from buyers on how to operate a business, or even making use of the Bendel's in-house studio. So Bendel's had a studio within the store. The building was a 10-story building, and for much of the time, it was making use of all of those 10 floors. So the studio, I believe, was up on the 8th floor. And the studio produced unique collections for the store. So again, another way to produce exclusive merchandise. And when Stephen Burrows was at Bendel's, he was also actually designing a line for the in-house studio. And after Burrows left, he went to 7th Avenue in the mid-70s. A young British designer, Bruce Oldfield, who is very well known for his couture designs in the UK, Geraldine recruited him to come to Bendel's, and he was designing for Bendel's studio. So Bendel's studio was open to new designers to also have some space to work. Bendel's also discovered new talent by hosting what they called Open Sea Days, which was a Friday practice launched by Jean Rosenberg in the 1960s, where local designers could come in every week and show their wares to the buyers, and buyers could make purchases. So this has subsequently become a bit of an industry standard, but was very new at the time. And this is actually how knitwear designer Joan Vass got her debut at Bendel's in just this way. So all told, Bendel's really became the fashion powerhouse in New York City in the 1970s and the envy of all the other stores. Irony Mark, who Michael Mamp quoted quite a bit earlier in one of his autobiographies, he goes on at length about how Geraldine Stutz had merchandised her way to stardom and that Bergdorf really was aspiring to the level that Bendel's had at that time. And the depth of design talent at Bendel's spanning decades also resulted in the formation of a distinctive Bendel look, so to speak. And so what was this look? In a 1967 interview for Clothes magazine, Stutz suggested it, quote, can be defined as avant-garde, but always within the bounds of good taste. So that's kind of how she summed it up. But more famously, she called fashion at Bendel's dog whistle fashion. And those were, quote, clothes with a pitch so high and special, only the thinnest and most sophisticated women would hear their call. So the final part of that quote on dog whistle fashion about the physical size of the Bendel's customer is particularly interesting. And in conjunction with those physical renovations, Stutz also set about overhauling the store's image and identity when she took over the reins in 1957. And this began by unapologetically narrowing the store's customer base, targeting a very particular woman, targeting an upper-class woman very interested in fashion. And the new Bendel woman was a young and active New Yorker, though she could be from out of town, who was hip. She was a sophisticated city woman. She was involved in a range of activities. She lived a big city life, but she also vacationed in the country. That was the profile of the Bendel's customer. In short, it was in many ways the Upper East Side's Ladies Who Lunch. Speaking in an interview with FIT, there's a great hour-and-a-half recording with Dorothy Handberg in the Oral History Collection, which again, similarly to Stephanie, getting to actually hear Geraldine Stutz's voice was pretty special. So there is that recording there for anyone who wants to make an appointment. And Stutz described her decision, quote, since I didn't know any better and was not a professional merchant, what I did was narrow the store's focus to a single customer on the theory that given our size, it was better to try to be everything to one specific customer than to try be a little bit of everything for every customer. This decision was somewhat surprising and also specifically contrasted the approach of larger department stores. For example, Macy's, though obviously very different players in the New York fashion game, their famous slogan was something for everyone. In contrast, Stutz's adopted line was, we can't be everything to everybody. It is significant that Henri Bendel projected Stutz's personal vision, and the president herself embodied the ideal Bendel woman. Stutz admitted that she remade the store into the kind of establishments she herself would like to shop at, and we heard that as a theme throughout the day of other female presidents having that insight into the shopping experience. And she said, I knew instinctively that we must be the kind of store that I myself would like to shop in, and that it must be a cozy, intimate place with friendly personal service to cater to sophisticated, small-sized women who love clothes. Again, the direct mention to small sizes carried at Bendel's, and indeed, we heard this in almost all of our interviews. Bendel's famously only stocked small sizes carrying nothing larger than a size 12, which converted to today's sizing standards is the equivalent of a size 8. So again, that very exclusive customer was something very particular to Bendel's. And it also links the store's target audience even more closely with Stutz herself, who embodied that diminutive, small-boned elegance of the Bendel woman. Stutz herself was only 5'4", 110 pounds, and a size 6, which by today's standards is only a size 2. And so what emerged over the 1960s and the 1970s was the formation of an informal club, so to speak, at Bendel's, shaped by those who worked there and those who shopped there, drawn to the store by Bendel's cachet of fabulous clothing. It was both exclusive and arguably somewhat elitist, but it was undeniably a magical place for wealthy, thin women with impeccable taste in New York City.
Thanks, Lauren. So to just sum up a little bit, so at Bendel's, Geraldine Stutz also developed the reputation and availability of New York designers and those from Europe, as the other women we've heard of this afternoon did. Stutz's success and skills as a retail and entrepreneur were further demonstrated when she succeeded in purchasing the store from Genesco Corporation in 1980. This made Stutz the first woman to ever own such a major New York City specialty store, or even department store, of course. Her relationship with Bendel's finally ended in 1986, following the sale of the store to what was then the Limited Group. And of course, as we know, the store then moved to Fifth Avenue, where it remains, but its characteristic shifted. And from what we've gathered, Geraldine Stutz never entered the store again, which maybe says something. So during Geraldine Stutz's leadership, the way it's been described to us, I think, and maybe this is the wrong analogy, but the store felt something like what we now call a concept store. In other words, it was typically the vision of one or two people, and it was carefully curated, again, as we would say today, to provide a very strong creative leadership in the retail, but also the display of fashionable clothes. So that provides a lovely segue to the next part of our program, where I want to I want to introduce you to, and then have a conversation with two former colleagues of Geraldine Stutz and employees at Bendel's, and maybe I can ask you just to come up, Marion Greenberg and Robert Rufino. So I'm going to introduce them as they're just making their way to the stage. So Marion Greenberg was a buyer at Henri Bendel's from 1971 to 1980, leading the evening wear department, Bendel's Fancy, where she worked with Geraldine Stutz, introducing the work of designers such as Zoran to Bendel's. Marion left to open her own fashion public relations firm, Marion Greenberg Incorporated, at a time when PR was an emerging business. It operated for 30 years, and MGI brought to New York brands such as Comme des Garçons, Jill Sander, and Alexander McQueen for Givenchy. Robert Rufino began his career in display at Henri Bendel in 1971 at the age of 19. Trained by the renowned visual display director Robert Curry, Robert Rufino became the visual merchandising director at Henri Bendel, staying with the store until 1982 for 11 years. He then went on to serve as the Vice President of Visual Merchandising and Vice President of Creative Services for Tiffany & Company from 1996 to 2009. And Robert is currently the Interiors Editor at Elle Decor. So please join me in welcoming them both. I want to ask, I'm sorry, I'm doing a bit of karaoke here. I want to ask Marion and Robert some questions, of course, but what we'd like to do is also to show you and have them speak to, and I don't know whether you can see, a wonderful set of slides up here, which we've just got access to, and it's the first time I'm seeing them on the big screen, so this is really exciting, which are from Robert's collection. And I think it would be great maybe if we could just ask you to speak a little, just to give us a little bit of context, some dates,
Robert,
and tell us a bit about these first. Well, but I think you've got things to say as well, Marion.
Oh, sure. Sonia Riggio.
So these are obviously showing us the designers at Bendel, but also just showing us again the famous street of shops, and of course your work in particular, Robert. Maybe you can just give us a little bit of background.
Talking to this thing?
Yeah, I'm afraid you've got to, yeah.
Anyway, the whole thing about Bendel's was that it was complete theater. This was Geraldine's stage, and everyone played a role in her play. And when you walk through the doors, you were just taken aback from the way the store was merchandised, from the merchandise that we carried, the music. I mean, the salespeople were like intimidating. You were like, wow. You had to be it to work there. You were dressed impeccably, your hair. It was an experience, and it was a poison because the customers, some of these ladies would come in twice a day. And I knew that because I spent half my life on the first floor re-merchandising the street of shops. And so I got to know many of the customers. And every year we had this great advantage because the ceilings were 25 feet tall to do these unbelievable Christmases, to adorn the street of shops with all these lanterns. They just weren't lanterns. They were all hand-painted upstairs. That I had this idea, we're going to spray gold paint, we're going to throw gold paint and lacquer them. And so every year it was a different fantasy you walked in, you know. This was my big fantasy. I grew up in New York. I grew up in Chinatown. So we did this whole thing on, you know, Chinese lanterns. All our mannequins were always made by Adele Rootstein. They were inspired by real models. Sarah Kapp was a very well-known model who worked for us at Bendel's, and Robert Curry and she were very good friends, so he got Rootstein to make a mannequin out of her. And one thing about the windows, all the hair, all the wigs were done by myself or my colleague Philip Smith, and all the makeup was real makeup. Every week I would paint these ladies. I should have been a famous makeup artist. But, and customers would come in and say, well, what makeup did you use on this? And what did you do on that? So, and going back to, at the time of the 70s, Geraldine had brought in Robert Curry, and Robert started street theater. He really changed the whole way window display was approached. It influenced Candy Pratz, who was at Charles Jourdan, who went to Bloomingdale's eventually, Colin Birch, who was at Bonwood Teller, at Bergdorf Goodman, there was Larry Laszlo. There was this whole buzz around town. There was this competition. Who had the best windows? We had the best windows because it was completely theater. So what everyone is looking at, after Geraldine bought the store, we completely changed the facade where the windows came down to the floor. Before it was, you looked up. So it really was more challenging.
And you could look in.
Yeah, and so you looked inside behind the windows. And here I was at 19 years old. It was a fantasy job. I had no idea what the hell I was doing.
Can I just go back before
Yeah.
we talk some more about the images to ask both you and Marion how you actually got there? How did you
How'd you
to
get
be
there?
employed?
I had met Jean Rosenberg. I was working at a buying office, and I was a girl that grew up in New York and loved Henri Bendel. It was, a fabulous store, and I was always very attracted to it. And when in the buying office, I would be in the market in New York, and I was always talking about Bendel's. So when they were looking for a buyer, actually, I first interviewed for a job for Bendel's Savvy, which was their younger department. And then they decided to take Diane Benson, who of course is a very good friend of ours. And she had a lot more experience than I did. And then they had, very shortly after, they had an opening in Bendel's Fancy, which was their fancy department. And so they hired me for that job, and I was thrilled because it was a department that was kind of transitioning. It was very old world, and it really gave me the opportunity to bring it into a new moment in time. And Geraldine was the one that gave us so much freedom to be creative, to find designers, to work with people. When we had the Friday morning go-sees, no one ever came to my department because it was all about sportswear then. So it was an opportunity to develop, special things and pieces with designers. People were in love with the store, so they were willing to make even one piece for you just to be at Henri Bendel, which was it was fun. It was also it created a very special environment. And I also have to say, Robert, people were sometimes intimidated to walk in the store. It had such a special atmosphere. But once they came in, I think everybody was very friendly. Everybody was very warm. It was a fun place to be. So that's why people kept hanging out.
But what about you?
Oh, Jean Muir, yeah.
Uh, Two of my friends were going for this job at Henri Bendel, and someone said, "You should apply for that job." I said, "I don't have that experience." I went to the High School of Fashion Industries. I went to FIT. I wanted to be a fashion designer. Like, ouch, I hate it. I did window display, but I didn't have a job. And I had this 3-hour meeting with Robert Curry. He says, "Why don't you work tonight?" And that was it. Then I met Geraldine Stutz, and we had a relationship for 33 years. After I left Bendel, she was like my second mother. And we were extremely, extremely close. And there was something very I mean, we would fight all the time, Would you go up? If you want the shop to open, you have to go upstairs because you're driving me nuts. And, once Geraldine trusted you, she trusted you. And one thing I've always learned, she always said, if you're going to do it once and do it right. Don't cheat. And, as someone said before, if you can't get the best, you hire the young who's going to be something. And it was challenging. It was a poison. You wanted more. You wanted more of this woman, She completely influenced my life. She made me never be afraid. And I think everyone who worked there became a family, We cared. You just it's 1 o'clock in the morning, you just cared about it. You had great pride. And it was never me. She always, when she always talked, it was we. We did this, Yes, I am the front runner of this empire, but without you people, I'm nobody. And she made everyone feel unique and special. And what kills me, I'm a visual person. After I left Bendel's, I went to magazines, and then I went to Tiffany. But there has never been a store like this. Takashimaya had that thing in the beginning, but there's, you walk in, you look at Barney's Bergdorf Goodman is still luxury, but it's massive. This was like going into someone's home, and when you went up to the other floors, they weren't shops, you entered a salon. The first salon, you felt like you were in some ballroom, but never intimidating, and all the salespeople were helpful, and it was a club,
Different
That's great.
Different way of shopping.
So what happened was, I guess somebody on 7th Avenue, I think it was Joe Prezan, that introduced me actually to Jean Rosenberg. And then that's how I really came to Bendel's. And then when they called me back to do Bendel's Fancy, that's when I started. I think it was 1971. So it was a very challenging time, to try to build up, when everybody was into sportswear, to try to build this department up. Because what can give you a good indication is they used to close the department in the summer because all their clients went away. So they put me on the 3rd floor to try to, because they closed the floor. And then I said, oh, this, that can't be. So slowly I developed, and relationships with special designers. And we really built the business, and it was a wonder. People always thought Bendel's didn't do any business, but we did. We had amazing range of clients, from very, high fashion, very social, to, just wonderful young people that wanted to be in the store. But it was a great mix of clients, very loyal clients. So
Can you tell us a bit more about actually being a being a buyer, because this has come up already this afternoon about, how significant buyers were and are in retail, but again, so many women and people with different roles that they're often overlooked. So can you tell us a bit more about,
well, I think today
Europe
the role of a buyer is very different.
Yeah,
It's very
we were talking
number orientated. This was not like that at all. We had a fabulous person who was our financial person, and he would practically do all your open to buys. I would go up there, and he just did it for you. It was just amazing. So that I really focused my energy on just trying to find the best product for the store. And I spent as a buyer, which I don't think is very, they don't give you that opportunity today, is that I was able to spend a lot of time on the floor with these amazing salespeople and with the customer. I mean, I was constantly, our department was on, Bendel's Fancy was on the second floor, and the receiving department was downstairs in the basement. I was constantly running up and down the stairs trying, because if something new came in, I'd bring it upstairs for a customer. Our relationship, we had great relationships with our clients. And they, Geraldine loved that. And for me, it was very important. I could really build the business that way. And I could see what the customers, liked and what they didn't like. We had fabulous, and she gave us the opportunity to buy the most special things that were available in the world. Because everybody really did want to sell to Bendel's. But what is also, it was a very different environment as far as it was much smaller. It was more intimate. And I think today everything is just, there's so much of everything, things get lost. And there it was, everything was really highlighted.
So can you tell us a bit more about the designers that you brought to Bendel's and the designers there? I mean, we've seen...
Well, Jean Muir was a designer that was very associated with the store, but I loved working with her. She was so special, and when I opened my own PR company, I continued to work with her. She loved my office, which was in the Bendel building, and Geraldine helped me acquire my office, so we continued our relationships with her and Jean Rosenberg, as well as Pat Tennant, who was here today, Pat Peterson, sorry, who ran the advertising and did all the those beautiful ads with her husband, Gus. But I also developed at the store a designer, Zoran, which is very reminiscent of the 70s. And we worked very closely together to develop, a modern collection that was very easy. We started with 5 easy pieces, and right away it was on the cover of Women's Wear Daily. So, and then I guess it was you and Robert and Bob did windows. I remember it was really a huge success. Yeah. So it was it was great that she gave us that chance.
I also wanted to ask you, Robert, about, just kind of presenting these designers to the public, presenting them the windows. I mean, the challenges that may be presented or the opportunities in terms of, your work, the whole visual merchandising area.
I think each window, you told a story or there was a mystery to it, I mean, I remember one window, there was a woman, dead in the snow, wearing Mary McFadden. She drank the poison bottle. So, I mean, everything had an edge to it, and people would come at night and stand and watch.
But they would come every week to
watch
see the
us,
new windows
yeah.
at Bendel's. It was a big thing at that time.
And of course, you would wait every day at 3 o'clock the next day to see if the windows were okay by the boss. And most of the time, they were okay, And or she would, Geraldine was a great theater person, so she would go to the theater a lot, and she would come by the windows to see what we were doing, and she just cared about her empire, and it was a great challenge, because you look around, and now it's I mean, the only store, in my opinion, that does great windows is Bergdorf Goodman. And Ralph Lauren's men's windows, to me, are really well done. But as far as, taking a mannequin and doing something over the top or something interesting, and, our customer wanted to be that mannequin, I want everything, And I had the freedom to do whatever I want. It's like, as I said, once Geraldine trusted you, no one told me you're going to put this with this. There was no coordinator. It was my world, and a great world. It was a great time in retail and fashion. I mean, when people say, well, I always say, well, if Geraldine was alive today, she was like the Anna Wintour, because she was so ahead of her time. She had an influence on so many designers and just people. She was out there,
Which is so wonderful that you're doing this, because she's really an untold story. So many people do not really know of, you know, when we talk about working at Bendel's, we have to say the original.
The original Bendel's, not
Because
that
really,
thing over there on Fifth Avenue.
It really
Ugh.
had nothing to do with the one that exists today. It was so, and it was on 57th Street. So at the time when they made the change, they were using the unused real estate to develop offices there. So you know, Geraldine, as I had said, she helped me open my office there, which was wonderful, and they became a client. So actually, she helped me start my business as well, because Bendel's was my first client. So, and then Jean Rosenberg introduced me to Ray Kawakubo of Comme des Garçons, and she became my first client, and I started doing public relations, which really was never a plan. It just kind of happened. And but the store really, in a way, it didn't prepare you for the outside world, because it was a bubble. It was so
Yeah.
special. When you left, you know, you thought the whole world was like that, but it wasn't. It really wasn't. You had so much freedom, and it was so creative, and it was such a happy environment. We loved being there, and nobody cared about themselves. It was about what was best for the store. And I think that's also very unusual. You know, today, it's a very different time. And people don't have you know, I think that's another thing, is that we had a lot of time to develop things. Today, people don't give you a lot of time. And I think that made a big difference.
So if you had to, and we'll open it for some questions in a moment. If you had to sum up Geraldine Stutz's legacy, because as you say, I mean, she's not very well known, but how would you sum that up? You know, in terms of New York fashion retail, I mean, although she's not known, there's...
I think she was an enormous influence.
Yeah, exactly.
Because the street of shops, people are still, I mean, a shop within a shop is used everywhere today, and she really created that concept. And that became very, very famous, even in our time. She knew that. And then developing designers. I think that was another thing that she was very well known for, right, Robert?
Yeah.
And then, you know, really nurturing them. And then I think she was just a great tastemaker. And dog whistle fashion.
Right.
We could use more of
Yeah.
it today. No, I think there are a lot of wonderful things, but it's really hard to weed through everything. And I think that she was like an art director. She curated everything. The store was so highly edited. And we all, you know, had that same feeling. But, you know, we had fabulous meetings that took place. Do you remember our meetings, Pat? They were fabulous. And you'd go upstairs and you'd present things that your product, either for advertising, for just to show everybody what was new, or if you were introducing something new. They were quite amazing. So it was a great environment, and it had a very special energy.
I mean, obviously, you know, it's been interesting for Lauren and I to build a picture of Geraldine Stutz. You know, we weren't, obviously, unfortunately, we didn't know her, but you reminded me when I was talking to Bruce Oldfield in London. He was saying then, as a young designer, he was living, I think, out in the East End of London, a very sort of shabby place. And Geraldine sort of came up in this wonderful car with a turban, and she kind of came in with this amazing glamour and style, and it really gave a wonderful picture of her, you know, and sort of swept him up as a designer. But it was, yeah, I mean, it's very, I think, you know, we formed the opinion too that, you know, she was very highly motivated and very, you know, very much the kind of directive behind the store, but then also, you know, an absolute collaborator, which is why, you know, you all worked with her for so long, and, you know.
Well, she was
so
always very enthusiastic, and she always was looking for the next sensation.
Always
You
positive.
know, I remember one day she said, "I'm on the west side, get in a taxi and come over here." What the hell are you talking about? So it was like around 4 or 5 o'clock, and we went through 60-something street, the Tavern on the Green was there, and there were all these lights on. She said, "I want that, but I want your version of it for Christmas." I went, "You gotta be fucking kidding me." So we did it. We did it. And she just, she loved to influence you. And she, every time, you know, we would do a Christmas, she would come in from the country with a bag of apples or a basket of apples. And I was like, "All right,
cakes,
guys.
remember our cakes?
Guys, don't put all this crap on the Christmas tree. Make her." But she always wanted to give. And, you know, she was very opinionated. And, like, you would say, yeah, she's right. You know, she was a great editor. She was a brilliant editor. And,
producer was
yeah.
like a big Hollywood producer, and she put all her energy into this amazing store. And I think today, sorry, Robert.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say today there is nothing comparable. I couldn't even, you know, what is comparable? Colette in Paris, maybe a little bit.
Well,
Because it's
I'd
so
say,
well edited.
to me, the modern version of Henri Bendel today is the Dover Street Market.
Or Dover Street,
Because
right.
it's totally out there. And, you know, we did have a Ralph Lauren shop, but it was Ralph Lauren
I think
done
maybe a combination,
our
Dover
way.
Street, Colette.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know,
Barney's was originally when Gene Pressman was
right,
there.
when it was downtown.
Yeah, I think
they
when
moved
it
uptown,
first,
they
because
lost
he
it.
was, I knew Gene and he was
Right.
in love with Bendel's.
Right.
And what really inspired him,
Mm.
because he originally wanted to go into the movie business, but his family business was Barney's.
Yeah.
So I think originally it had that real kind of, I guess the other thing besides that Geraldine created, you know, she was such a tastemaker, it had a magical, it was like you were in this magical kingdom. It really was, with the fabulous street of shops and then going upstairs to all the departments.
But I also think she influenced so many people. They would come in, well, what napkins is she using? What you know, because I spent so much time on the first floor. People were always curious, you know, well, what would Miss Stutz do? It's like,
Right.
And, you know, I would, you know, I mean, I knew, you know,
And the
I
press,
lived
she
to
was
breathe
so-
that store.
yeah,
You know, that was my life.
The other thing was when she was in Europe with us, I mean, they always wanted to get a quote, but the press was such a small community then. It was tiny. I think in today's environment, she'd be extremely well known. But of that time, she was, and very respected.
I mean, it broke my heart that I had to leave because she was so angry. I said, you know, there's one store. Where am I going? I need to do something else with my life. But you know, I mean, after 11 years, we were friends till.
Oh, every time that I did something with a client
Right.
in my own business, she was there as Jean Rosenberg. She came to everything. I remember when I was working with Jill Sander when I first started, and we introduced a fragrance here in America. Geraldine was there. She was everywhere to support us. She was wonderful. And she gave us a lot of confidence. Like when we worked at Bendel's, you know, and wanted to do something special, it was always a very positive environment.
Sounds it.
We were lucky. We were blessed.
We were.
Well, we're blessed to have you here. I'd love to open it up if anyone's got any questions, because this is a real treat to have Marion and Robert here. Does anyone have anything?
And can I just say that
Please.
Pat was such a fabulous person to work with. Pat came to the store in the mid-'70s from the New York Times, and she did all the advertising, also had a promotion, but the advertising with Gus, her husband, was so phenomenal. And it was so avant-garde for its time, and it was so spirited. And it really was hard to put the image of Bendel's in a photo, but you did it, Pat.
Yeah, and there was some of the images that we've just seen.
Right,
that
that we've
Lauren's just shown us.
And
yeah.
on that note, when we share our website, many of those images are on display in our online exhibition galleries. So we're very fortunate that Pat and her husband gave us permission to share those.
So we'll see those in a few minutes. But does anyone have any questions?
I'm curious when you say she was a great editor, and you know, obviously we normally think of an editor as somebody in print, and so you're working with this three-dimensional space and 3D objects. So how might you explain that a little bit more, being this editor producer in that kind of setting?
Well, you know, I'm talking from your point of view, but when we had our meetings and if she didn't like something, it didn't go anywhere. You know, she edited it. It's like, does that make sense?
Well, first of all, right. I mean, she had the vision of the store was a very edited vision. And so that's why we always say she was a visionary, but it wasn't for everyone. The store was created for a kind of, you know, very sophisticated New York kind of chic woman, but it had an effortless way about a tone to it. And I think that if we brought something that really wasn't right for the store, she was the one that would say,
Nope.
you know, it wasn't really right for Bendel's. It was very edited, and it was curated in a way. Today they use the word curated quite a lot.
Right.
But it would be right for the store. And to begin with, the idea of which shops would go into the first floor, which did change over the years. During the time that I was there and you were there, Robert, they changed quite a bit. There were a few that were there all the time, but the different departments changed too. Some designers changed. Ralph Lauren was there for a period of time when he first started,
Right.
and then of course he moved on.
Right.
But she would choose very carefully what she would allow to be in the store, and we all really understood that.
So what do you think was her sort of source of inspiration? It sounds like the city itself was her source of inspiration, but what else might have been, do you think?
What do you think, Rob? The theater?
I think
Like
that
you said.
I think the theater, but you know, Henri Bendel was about one thing. It was about Geraldine Stutz. If she
And
was
style and
she
taste.
she was the customer,
Yeah.
and either you got it or you didn't.
Exactly.
And you know,
That's a
today you don't really hear about Sonia Rykiel, but Geraldine lived in Sonia. All the buyers, most of them lived in Sonia. That was their uniform.
Right, and Jean Rosenberg discovered
know?
Sonia based in Paris somewhere. And Geraldine also sent Jean Rosenberg to Europe at a time nobody went to Europe to find, you know, these special things. She would tell her to go buy whatever you find that you love. And that's the way we bought. Whatever you loved, hopefully, it
She
was
loved.
the same vision that she loved for the store. And it was like that. It's very rare today. So it was a very personal vision. And she was the customer. We all were.
That's also something that other people picked up on, not just employees. We corresponded by email with Stephen Burrows, and that was one comment that he made, that the one thing you took away from Bendel's was that it was one woman's very specific vision of a fabulous place, and that it was the most unique shopping experience in New York. And again, building on her really particular vision for Bendel's, you know, again, she had that training in editorial, in fashion magazines before she transitioned to merchandising. But when she bought the store in 1980, they actually, she went out to other cities to see about the possibilities of introducing street of shops locations in Chicago, in LA, et cetera. And she came back from that trip and decided, no, you know, there was no other city in the United States that could support the vision that she had for Bendel's. And so instead of opening up physical locations, they decided to reopen the mail order catalog in order to continue to grow the business to other locations. But that Bendel's as a store was really, she felt that it was so New York based with a particular customer. So if that kind of contributes to that answer.
And you know, it was only not really just about the clothing, but we did a tremendous business with the Lake Shop. I mean, they would be in meetings for hours talking about hosiery, and there was a huge following.
And I would give my
Yeah.
colors, Jean Muir colors, every
I mean-
season, or whatever designer I was working with Chloe. Karl Lagerfeld was designing Chloe at the time. We would give them the colors. So we'd work with the buyer who was doing the hosiery. So we're very kind of coordinated. It was a real family that worked together on the, you know, together.
And whoever heard of scented candles? Potpourri. I mean, you know, we were the first ever to have that shop when you first walked in. Paper shop, Peter Barton's Closet, Men's Boutique, Lee Bailey was really Lee Bailey's shop was before his time. It was all very ad hoc, modern
And then there was
housewares.
Frank.
And Frank was more
Frank
fanciful.
McIntosh.
And then, you know, bringing food to a store, we were the first people to bring
To
in
mix all the
EAT, Eli Zabar's first little shop. With
Yeah,
shop.
yeah. I think that's interesting that we're talking about Bendel's as a fashion store, but it did have what we now call lifestyle as well. Oh, Phyllis, you're dying to say something. Go ahead.
I have a question. Was this before forecasting? Has forecasting sort of taken over the curatorial, you know, people?
I don't think Geraldine ever went
No.
She
to a
wasn't forecasting,
No.
no.
This
but
was
it
this
just
was
taste.
It was
was
from the heart.
from the heart, and that was it. You know,
So forecasting, you would say, is much more commercial?
it's commercial. The world has changed. I mean, you can go to any go up and down Madison Avenue, go to Paris, go to London, you see the same stuff. So at least when you went to Bendel's, you went, there was, you know, from Mira de Moss, from Stephen Burrows, from Sandra, and so many unknown designers that Marion found that were like, wow, you know. Now it's like the same, you know. Do I need to see another Prada suit? I mean, Prada's great, but if everything stood out. You wanted to be special, you went to Henri Bendel.
I know there's another question, but I just wanted to say, I mean, you made the point which we've taken away, that I think, you know, today the closest is something like Colette in Paris or like Dover Street Market, which is not just like the single person vision, but obviously Colette is just one store, but with Dover Street Market, how those stores also differ depending on where they are in New York or you know, Tokyo or London. So I think also that thinking about the place, thinking about the experience, and also I think, Robert, you said it first, you know, the fact that Geraldine Stutz had always that personal interest in theatre, and you know, how much theatre is part of that store experience. Anyway, I think there's another question. Mike, have you got the microphone there? We'll give you the mic.
Hi. Well, it seemed that from the beginning, a lot of people have heard in the connection of art and design with these stores, beginning with Dorothy Shaver's interested in MoMA, and then Geraldine Stutz using, I guess, at Warhol at I. Miller.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, I know you said there are connections with theater, but I'm wondering also if there were connections to the museum world and art and design that way.
I can hop in there a little bit. Yes, Geraldine was very involved in the civic world as well. She was on the board, a trustee at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She also was on the board at the MoMA. She actually spent a 2-year term with the National Endowment of the Arts promoting fashion there as well. She was a trustee at the Phoenix Theater. Again, her love of theater. She was very active in the theater community, very close friends with Hal Prince, who's a very famous Broadway director, et cetera. And so Geraldine had 3 loves: fashion, theater, also gardening as well, which she pursued at her Connecticut home. Especially, and which the Geraldine Stutz Trust, who gave us the funding, that's what the 3 different causes that they support in her memory these days. So yes, she was very active. Similarly, as we heard from Michael, Geraldine was married for a period of time but never had children, and so she really invested a lot of energy in the individuals. Pardon? She married an artist. David Gibbs. And actually she went by Mrs. Gibbs in Connecticut throughout her life. And so Geraldine invested a lot of time into and energy into both other pursuits and other people in her life. And she found a very fulfilling life.
She did work with Andy Warhol, if I did hear that correctly.
Right.
When she was at I. Miller,
Right.
he did drawings for her. And we walked in her office, she had the shoe drawings. Because she had, before Bendel's, she had worked at I. Miller. And she was very knowledgeable about shoes and loved shoes.
Yeah, and I mean, those drawings are so famous to us now.
Very famous today.
Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions, I'd just like to thank again Marion and Robert so much for being here and for everyone else. So as you've recognised, along with the other speakers this afternoon, during the course of our research, we collected a diversity of material using a range of different methods. We also, we're lucky to have access to wonderful people, but we were never entirely certain of what the sources, what would be available and what they would reveal. And also we were very fluid, and the Trust were terribly supportive and very fluid in terms of the outcome of this research. And we, also, as Lawrence just indicated, we did find out quite a lot about Geraldine Stutz as a person as well as her professional roles. So as Stephanie was saying at the end of her presentation, a book or an exhibition would have been possible as a result of this research and still would be possible, but we only had the time limited. So we decided that the best strategy to collect our findings and to be able to share them was in the form of a website. So Lauren's just going to share the website a little bit now. We had hoped the website would be live today. That's the URL. It's not, because technology has its way, and its way was that the website is not available today, but it should be up Monday, next week. Yeah, so you can certainly find it. And Lauren's done a very good job with support to not just putting the information together, but presenting it. So basically the website allows us to share our findings now, but also allows others to have access to what we find, to continue this work, and maybe to develop and collaborate with us or with others in the future. And certainly if while we're having the reception and chatting informally, if anyone wants to just flick through the website, and Lauren can speak more about it then. Do you want to say something? No. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to quickly walk through the website, there are a few, the most probably principal component that's of interest is the online exhibition galleries. And I would really like to take the time to thank both Robert Rufino and Pat Peterson for providing such an amazing collection of images in the gallery Street Theater and Picture Perfect Advertising the Store, which shows an 8-year campaign, which Marion was referring to. We also have some pictures of the store and many portraits of Geraldine provided by the Geraldine Stutz Trust. They had a great cache of images and newspaper articles, etc. So there's about 200 images that you can peruse in those galleries. We have just some summaries of the research that we've been doing. We'll also have the video from today's conference up under events. So if there's ever questions. We also have 2 interactive timelines, one of which showcases both the life of Geraldine Stutz and in parallel with what was happening at Henri Bendel, as well as a secondary timeline about kind of a very, very, very brief chronology of the department store in New York City and the various migrations from Lower Manhattan in the early 19th century all the way up to Upper Fifth Avenue, where Henri Bendel was today, as well as information about our contributors, about other very brief descriptions of other women, including Hortense Oldham, Mildred Custon, Dorothy Shaver, but also Selma Weiser of Charivari, Helen Galland, etc. So all of that is there. Eventually, if I ever finish writing up all of our research, hopefully we'll be able to share papers on Geraldine Stutz here in the future as well. So the website address is down there. I'll also pull up the live website at the conclusion, so feel free to come over and search around. It's functional. It just needs to be switched over to the live server on Monday. So, and I would also like to take this moment to thank Adrienne Lacmont, who was the website designer for us and put in so many hours to help us make the website real. And so thank you.
Just some final thank yous for me, and then I promise you can get a drink, or I promise I can get a drink, and I hope you'll join me. It is near the holidays. So anyway, so thank you, all of you, for being here. And as I say, it is near the holidays, and we really, this wasn't necessarily our first choice of timing, so we really do appreciate you being here and for contributing. And also thank you to our speakers. They've really enriched our knowledge and made for just a really stimulating afternoon. I'd also thank for organising the sort of the important background organisation to the symposium, Savannah Kustra from ADHD Administration over there, waiting to pour the wine. I'd like to thank Laura Beltran-Rubio from MA Fashion Studies Year 2, who's standing there, for publicity and putting up with my emails. And also Elena, Erica, Julie, and Larry, MA Fashion Studies Year 1 students, for assisting today. Are they still here? Or have they gone home? They're there. They're over there. And regarding the project as a whole, again, to thank the Geraldine Stutz Trust wholeheartedly, in particular Alan Greenberg, who's with us today at the back, and also to Emma Turner in London, who have both given us help and lots of moral support and encouragement. And also to everyone we interviewed. I won't name them for fear of missing anyone you've heard from and of some of them today, but without them, without their invaluable contributions, this wouldn't have happened. They can be found on the website. And also Sadly, some are still who are not with us now. We interviewed Carlos Falci, who gave us some fabulous information, and unfortunately, he's now passed away. But we've captured that on the website, so that was a wonderful privilege. I'd also like to thank again the first two Stutz research fellows, Maureen Brewster and Jung-Yo Peng. I'd also like to thank Adrian Lachman, because I know without him and without the technical support and the pulling the website back to life when it nearly all disappeared into the ether or the internet, it would not have happened. And most of all, I'd like to thank and indebted to the third Stutz Research Fellow, Lauren Sagadore, without whom this would not have happened. She has been a complete professional. And a huge pleasure to work with, and I wished I could encourage her to do a PhD, but maybe in another life. I've got that on the record now. Anyway, thank you all. Please join us for drinks, and thank you for being here.